where every clue hides a secret, and every secret has a story.
A pale figure stepped as though onto a carriage that never stopped. Hamish's hand tightened on the lantern handle, and he hissed, "Who goes there?" The figure did not answer. He took 2 quick paces toward the platform edge and saw only mist and rail. Suspicion pinned him to the boards. He watched the place the figure had occupied. The platform smelled of wet wood and coal smoke. A ring of darker damp marked the point where boots had met plank, though no train had been at Windermere for hours. Hamish Calder kept his voice low. "There was someone there," he said. He set the lantern on the bench and rubbed his chin with a calloused thumb. Suspicion moved his pulse into his throat. He walked the length of the damp ring and crouched to examine the prints. They were narrow, of a worn sole, and the impression began and ended abruptly, as if the person had stepped into nothing. He had been stationmaster at Windermere for 26 years. He knew the schedule by ear and the habits of travellers by sight. The platform creaked under his boots. He set his brass pocket watch on his knee and clicked it open by feel. The hands showed 20 minutes past 11. Hamish frowned. No train anywhere near Windermere until dawn. A woman ran up the lane before Hamish could rise from his crouch. She nearly swept past the lantern with her satchel. "Hamish," she said, breath shorthamish. "It's Eliza." She pressed a hand to her mouth. Eliza Fairbairn's voice shook. "Me friend did not come back from town," she said. "Margaret, she was meant to return on the 6 o'clock. She did not. I found her things in the market, and then nothing." Her hands trembled so she clasped them. She tugged at her sleeve and looked at the platform edge. Hamish put the pocket watch away. "It," he said. "Tell me every step." He pointed to the bench beneath the lamp. He measured her with the grey blue of his eyes. Eliza sank. She held her canvas satchel in both hands as if it were the only thing anchoring her. Eliza spoke in short bursts. "He met at the post. I saw her purse by the stall. She would be back for the school papers. Then I walked to the weaver's, and when I came home she stopped and swallowed. She was not there. I came straight here." Her voice dropped. She named Margaret's full name once, and that anchor made Hamish's jaw set. Hamish rose. He walked past the lamp toward the siding and touched the rail with a gloved finger. The metal was cold and tasted of salt. He followed damp footprints that led away from the board and toward the lane. "Someone walked away from the platform," he said. He pointed to Eliza. "I saw anyone else on the lane." Eliza shook her head. "No. Only the market keeper closing his shutters." I ran. Her hands trembled again. She clasped them until her knuckles went white. They were still speaking when the bell of the delayed regional service pealed down the line. Not scheduled, but the sound came, and with it the thud of boots and the rattle of a satchel. Inspector Ewan Hart stepped from the carriage into the lamplight. He kept his coat buttoned tight and his leather satchel across his shoulder. He looked at the platform with a steady, assessing eye. He did not ask for the station ledger. He walked to the footprints and crouched. Ewan's voice was calm. "Hamish Calder," he said. "You summoned someone." He reached for the suitcase Hamish had placed on the bench. Hamish answered in a measured tone. "I didn't summon anyone, Inspector. I found the prints and the damp luggage at the edge of the platform." He pointed to the scuffed casa that turned up. After the figure vanished, Ewan opened the suitcase with precise fingers. He removed a folded shawl and a tin of buttons. He paused over a small bundle of letters. "Margaret's letters." Eliza in a small voice. She leaned forward until Ewan looked up. He touched the top envelope and his thumb left a small oil mark on the flap. Ewan held the letters up toward the lamplight and read one line aloud. "If I do not return by the first light, trust the ticket." He looked at Hamish. "Trust the ticket." Hamish felt the suspicion harden into worry. He stepped closer to the inspector and spoke in a voice that had the weight of a man's years of watching for danger scheduled trains. "No one should have been boarding anything, Ewan. Let the letters fall back into the case." He probed the lining with his fingers and withdrew a crumpled ticket stub. "Look here," he said. The stub bore an intermediate stamp and a routing that did not match any Winmer schedule. The name on the stub was familiar only by the letter M. Cartwright, a name Hamish had seen once in the ledger as a passenger who never returned. Eliza leaned in and read the name aloud. "Margaret Cartwright," she said. Her voice cracked. She spoke the name like a plea. That was the girl who left for the sea last spring and never came back. She looked at Iwan. "Do you know her?" Iwan did not answer immediately. He fingered the stub and rubbed his thumb along the worn edge. His green eyes narrowed. He spoke with the precision of someone cataloguing pieces. "This ticket bears a stamp from the coastal route. It should have been stamped again at the harbour junction. Someone removed that second stamp. The handwriting on the name is not the clerk's. This is deliberate." He closed the case and handed it back. Hamish felt the emotion in his chest shift. Suspicion had first tightened. Now it eased into a low, protective concern. He moved so that his shadow covered the suitcase. "You should wait," he said. "If the person returns, we must know who they are. If there is foul play, we must stop it." He set his lantern back on the bench and spun the watch open and shut with a practiced motion. "Eliza Rosie will stay," she said. "Margaret might come back this way." "I will not leave the platform alone." Hamish frowned. "Eliza, it's past your curfew." "You can't," she interrupted him. "Hamish, she is my friend. I taught her nephew. I will not go home and leave the place empty." Her voice had a firmness that set the station master polite objections aside. Iwan watched them. He folded his hands and nodded. "On sea will keep watch then," he said. They spread themselves along the platform. Hamish took the lamp and paced the boards in short measured circles. He had a habit of adjusting his cap the same way each time. His steps were small and sure. Eliza sat and kept her satchel in her lap. She straightened her scarf and clutched the locket at her throat. Iwan leaned against the office threshold with his hands in his pockets. He tapped his fingertips when he thought. The night narrowed into small sounds: the drip from the eave, the clack of a loose board, the distant cry of a sea bird. An hour passed. The station clock did not change its face, but Hamish's watch ran. Footsteps on the lane made them start and then slow. Each small noise tightened voices. "Did you see anything?" Eliza at one point. Hamish shook his heavenly prints that begin and end like a step into fog. Iwan crouched and inspected the damp ring again. He took out his brass magnifying lens and held it over the scuff. "There are fibers on the sole," he said. "Coarse wool and seaweed grit." Whoever passed here had been near the shore. Hamish's hands tightened around the lantern. He imagined Margaret at the market, picking up a packet, folding a note. He pictured Eliza searching the stalls. Those concrete moments now fed his worry. He breathed shallowly. His body betrayed him with a small, controlled shiver. They kept watch. The fog thickened along the siding and folded around the beam of the lantern. The rails began to disappear into a white smear. Hamish walked a slow arc and kept the lamp tilted so its light struck the sleepers. He felt watched. His eyes found a second set of prints that had not been there an hour before. They led from the lane back toward the siding and then vanished at the junction. Eliza stood when Hamish called her. She leaned close to the edge and peered down the track. "Someone walked that way," she said. "They went toward the old siding." She took a step forward, and Hamish reached for her sleeve and held it with a flat palm. His grip was steady. "Stay here," he told her. "Iwan Rose'll check the siding," he said. He moved with the quiet, deliberate steps of a man used to examining small things. He took the worn ticket from his pocket and tucked it into his notebook. He walked along the rail to the siding and bent beneath the broken lamp. The siding had a low gate and a stack of abandoned crates. Iwan found a smear of damp on one crate and a thin trail of scuffs that led to the field. When Iwan called out, his voice had a different edge. "Hamish."
"Eliza!"
"There is a trail beyond the siding. It leads toward the lane to the cliff path. Whoever left these prints moved on foot. Away from the station they followed with lantern and satchel. The lane's soil kept the moisture and held the prints." Hamish's boots filled with cold. He felt the suspicion twist into a sharper fear. His hands began to tremble with the effort of not stepping too quickly. The three moved faster. The lane narrowed and a single lamp in a fisherman's cottage cast a thin yellow disk. A whistle blew somewhere distant, then a roar of metal filled the air. A train thundered along the main line without stopping. It had no light in its windows, only the blur of passing compartments. Hamish saw a pale figure step up onto a carriage's running board as the train swept by. Yuan lunged, shoulder forward, and reached for the figure as the carriage flashed past. He grabbed a sleeve. The fabric slid through his fingers like wet linen. He heard a thin, resisting sound and felt a hand that did not push back so much as slifold. Yuan shouted. His voice rode the wind of the passing engine. Hamish ran to the car's side and tried to catch at the phantom's coat. Eliza called Margaret's name. The carriage blurred past. For a heartbeat, Yuan's fingers closed on a coat, and then they were empty. The figure vanished into the wake of the train. When the rails were empty and the distant whistle faded, the place where the figure had stood was empty save for a scuffed luggage tag and a ticket stub lying on the wet plank beneath the lamp. Hamish crouched and picked them up. The tag had the initials MC in a hand that had been pressured by long travel. The ticket had an intermediate stamp that matched the stub from the suitcase. They stood in silence for a single long breath. The lamp cast their faces in hard relief. Yuan held the ticket between two fingers and turned it so the light caught the roting the stub and this stub match. He said someone has been moving along the coastal roting, then boarding trains that do not call here. Either the trains are running ghost services, or the person is trying to be taken away by services that will not stop. He pocketed the ticket. Eliza's shoulders folded. She pressed her hand to her mouth and then dropped it to her satchel. Margaret would never run away. She said she left her needlework and the ledger at the school. Her voice narrowed into a stubborn line. Hamish took a breath and spoke, with the determination of one who had tended this station through storms and strikes. Then we follow the route on this ticket. If her name is on it, then she wanted passage. If she wanted passage, someone took that choice away. We must find out who stamped it and who removed the harbor mark. He set the lantern down on the bench. The light pooled on the ticket and the tag. Yuan mapped the stamps with his finger. There is a faded mark of a shipping house. It leads to a harbor south of here. We can trace it. We will need a list of departures for the last month and a look at the shipping ledgers. He closed his notebook and looked up at Hamish and Eliza. Hamish nodded. He keep the ledger here. We'll check every name and compare stamps. We will also ask the market keeper about a woman with a faded shawl. Eliza, you come with us to question the stalls. Eliza straightened so quickly her satchel slapped her hippie. I'm coming, she said. She unclasped her hands and tucked the locket beneath her collar. If Margaret is out there, I will not leave her to a route that never stops. They worked through the ledger as the first grey of dawn quickened. Hamish took out the station map and placed pins where the ticket's routing suggested. Yuan traced a line with a pencil and wrote names beside the points. Eliza read aloud a passage from a letter found in the suitcase. If I do not make the harbor stamp, look for the scuffed tag and the ticket with the C mark. She swallowed. She wrote that her voice steadied into a practical tone. She meant us to follow. Hamish felt a different shift in his chest now. The suspicion had become resolve. He closed the ledger with his palm and rose. The station returned to its ordinary creaks. The lamp sputtered as Hamish wound the brass. He moved to the office door and locked it, then took the ticket and the tag and pinned them beneath the glass of the ledger. He set them where the pins marked the harbor route. Outside, gulls called over the sound of carts. Yuan shouldered his satchel and eked out the faint scrape of a chair. He read the final entry in the ledger again by lamplight. We'll leave at first light. He said we will go to the harbor and the shipping houses. We will find who stamped this ticket and who removed the harbor mark. His voice was precise and there was no flash of grand emotion in it, only the clear intention of a man arranging facts. Eliza buttoned her coat and slipped a hand into Hamish for a second, as if to check his steadiness. "Be careful," she said, Hamish. Her fingers closed in a small decisive squeeze. Hamish clicked his cap and smoothed the crown. He adjusted his watch by feel. He set the lantern on the desk and packed the scuffed case with the letters "We go together," he said, "first light. We follow the routing." He paused and touched the crease of the ticket beneath the glass. The final paragraph of the night tied itself to a concrete plan. They would trace the coastal route from the ledger to the harbour. They would ask the shipping houses to show their stamps. They left the office as the horizon turned a thin, pale grey. The platform seemed smaller in daylight. Hamish closed the heavy station door and pinned the key to his watch chain. Yuan slung the satchel and checked the magnifier one last time. Eliza took her satchel and folded her scarf tight. They stood for a moment beneath the lamplight and the white morning. Hamish placed the ticket in his palm and looked at the three of them. "Follow this," he said. He set the ticket into his pocket. The concrete act of putting the ticket away resolved the night's immediate question. They moved off the platform together, toward the lane that led to the road and south toward the harbour, their footsteps measured and certain. At the lane's mouth, Hamish turned once and looked at Windermere Station. The lamp burned low. He did not speak a reflective sentence about fate or endings. Instead, he closed the station ledger, took a pin from the map, and stuck it by the harbour mark. The pin caught the corner of the ticket stub beneath the glass. The tangible stake in the ledger anchored the decision. He locked the office key in his pocket and walked with Yuan and Eliza toward the road. The route and the ticket had given them a direction. They would follow it. Inspector Yuan Hart burst into the station office holding an open, damp suitcase and slammed it on the desk. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he said, "Look, the suit's lining hung wet, and the single ticket lay stained on top. A handkerchief lay folded beside it." Within those three objects, Yuan saw the problem plainly. A passenger had boarded and not arrived. Suspicion governed his next movements. He did not wait for explanation. He set the suitcase down and began to sort items with quick, practical motions. Hamish Calder stood by the stove with his lantern on the table, eyes narrow and hands worrying the rim of his cap. Eliza Fairbairn hovered at the doorway, her fingers pressed to the small silver locket at her throat. "Where did you find this?" Yuan, tapping the ticket with a fingertip. He kept his voice flat to steady the room. The ticket read a destination in the next county, and the ink had run at the edges from Moisture Platform 3. Hamish replied he found it by the bench. "Before I went for my rounds," he Hamish named slowly, like admitting a fact that still surprised Hemi thought someone had left it. "I never thought you thought wrong." Yuan cut in. "Someone left it because someone went missing." "Tell me exactly when you saw the figure." Yuan's hands did not tremble, but his fingers tapped the suitcase lid with a quick, impatient rhythm that matched the suspicion in his mind. Hamish set the lantern on the desk and leaned forward. "It was just before dawn." I hissed. He made the sound again and rubbed his thumb along the crescent scar on his cheek. "It stepped as though onto a carriage that never stopped." "I saw only mist afterward." Hamish, his part plainly, the stationmaster habit of reporting facts. Eliza stepped closer. He saw a gloved hand on the platform rail. She said he thought it was Mrs. Calder's boy, at first. "The handkerchief there, my locket was inside when I opened it. That belongs to Marion." "Marion promised shed leave at first light." Her voice broke on the name, then steadied. She unclasped the locket and pressed it into her palm, showing the small oval with a faded hair ribbon inside. Yuan folded the locket into a paper napkin and slid it into his jacket. "Here, Eliza, you know Marion's plan." He leaned close to see her reaction. Eliza nodded. She would go to her brother in the town beyond the viaduct. She had a ticket already. Her fingers clutched the satchel strap. She left a note. "But I thought it was a trifle." Yuan felt the suspicion shift toward frustration. If Marion planned to leave, why had no one met her? If she had boarded a passing train, why had she vanished? He found himself thinking in small, operational questions. When did the train pass? Which trains were due? Who could have interfered? Show me the ledger. Hamish, Iwan. He moved to the desk and pulled open a drawer. The station ledger had been used for decades. Its entries were neat columns of names, routes, and marks. Hamish brought the ledger and set it down as if it were a fragile animal. Iwan flipped pages until he found the evening's entries. He traced a line with his thumb and then froze. A name had been crossed out with a heavy pen stroke. The crossed name matched a respected local traveller, Mr. Ralston, who came through Windermere on business at irregular intervals. Who crossed this? Iwan. Hamish looked at the ledger and then at Iwan. Not I. I would not cross a man's name in my book. I only mark arrivals and departures. His voice held a note of wounded propriety. Hamish's hands found the ring of keys on the desk, and he fiddled with them as if to deny the accusation. Eliza leaned over the page and read the name. She frowned. Ralston was here last week. He argued with Marion's brother about a shipment. He left in anger. She touched the crossed line with her fingertip, then drew back as if the ink might stain her. Iwan felt a second emotion shift from frustration into concentrated curiosity. He'd take me to platform 3. Show me where you found the suitcase, Hamish. Eliza, stay close. If Marion truly intended to go, you might remember small things. She told you his orders were brisk. He needed movement. Questions alone would not produce answers. On the platform, noon light lay thin and the rails flashed with pooled water from last night's mist. Iwan walked the boards. He followed a trail of damp footprints at the platform edge. They began crisp by the threshold and thinned into indistinct impressions where the boards were bare. He crouched and pressed his palms to the wood to feel the grain and the damp footprints fade. Here, Hamish. He pointed to the spot where prints blurred into nothing. His voice was constrained. The stationman habit of counting details had given way to unease. Iwan moved along the prints. He knelt and ran a gloved finger through a shallow depression. The wood smelled of damp coal and old oil. The prints were the width of a man's boots. They left a darker stain that vanished 2 long paces before the trackside. The pattern did not match the boot treads from the local patrols. That fact tightened Iwan's focus again. He straightened and looked up the line of the rails. Far down, a signal post stood like a thin, clean fist against the sky. Someone walked straight to the step. Then there is no more print. Whatever left them did not walk away the way a living person would. His words were not an invocation of the supernatural. They were a catalogue of facts that contradicted ordinary movement. Back in the office at early afternoon, Eliza removed the locket from Iwan's jacket and opened it to show the hair ribbon. She lifted it between thumb and forefinger. This belongs to Marion. She said she braided it into her hair the last Sunday before she planned to leave. She promised she'd put it away for safekeeping. I should have noticed sooner. The admission landed like a small blow. Eliza's hands trembled, and then she set the locket on the desk as if it were a compass that might point to the missing woman. Iwan watched her. He watched the way she clasped her hands and how she tugged at the edge of her sleeve when she paused. He noted the concrete details, the locket's clasp worn at one corner, a thin line of dried glue where Marion had once repaired it. These were proofs. They were not feelings. He filed them into his head. The afternoon introduced a new discovery. While examining the suitcase's inner pocket, Iwan found a torn ledger page folded small and tucked behind a lining. He unfolded it carefully. A name had been jotted in a hurried hand and then crossed with 2 neat slashes. The name matched Mr. Ralston. Cross a name. Iwan aloud. Hamish took a breath and said, perhaps someone wanted to hide that he had come through. If Mr. Ralston's trips were known, people could track him. Crossing his name is odd. This station does not make a habit of erasing comings and goings. Hamish's calloused hands gripped the ledger's edge. Eliza's eyes widened. Ralston argued with Marion's brother. He thinks about debts and promises. Marian feared being tied to her brother's obligations. She would not stay, she spoke quickly. Confession sharpened her tone. Not to tell anyone until she left. She begged me to keep it quiet so she could go alone. I should have insisted she take someone. With her guilt tightened her shoulders. Yuan's curiosity hardened into resolve. We will not leave this to conjecture. We will sit the platform tonight. We will watch every passing carriage. He paused and added, we will test what happens when a figure steps as though onto a train that does not answer the step. The words were plain. They contained a plan. Hamish protested, voice small and practical. The children. Winmer's children go home through this station. I do not want them to be frightened. He looked at both of them, then at the ledger and at the damp ticketer. Will protect them. Hamish, one will not invite danger to the platform. We hide our watch. If someone intends harm, we will be waiting. His tone left no room for argument. They prepared through dusk. Hamish boarded the waiting rooms with wool blankets and extra lantern oil. He locked the main door but left a back window ajar to listen. Eliza arranged the chairs beside the ticket clerk's desk and smoothed the seat cushions as if to keep herself busy. Yuan checked his notebook and the brass magnifying lens he carried. He wrapped his hands around the lens with a steady, purposeful motion. Night fell quickly. The station lamps threw small, warm circles on the planks. The fog rolled from the low moor and wrapped the platform in a damp, moving sheet that clung to boots and coat hems. Their stakeout formed a neat geometry. Hamish at the lantern, Yuan half hidden behind the ticket counter, Eliza near the door with the locket pressed into her palm. Hours passed with the sound of distant trains and the creak of the station. Conversation was spare. When they spoke, their lines were short and precise. When the sound comes, Yuan, we move. Hamish, you show no light. Signal nothing. We must see if the figure steps, and if anything answers. He tapped the edge of the desk to mark the planet. Hamish whispered, if it is Marian, I will not let it go again. Eliza. Her voice was a thin thread and then steadied. The night sharpened. A distant whistle cut through the fog. Yuan felt his pulse lift and then slow. He fought to keep it steady. Footsteps approached at a measured cadence. He braced himself and leaned forward so his breath would not show against the lamp glass. A pale passenger appeared along the platform and paused at the step as though to board. Yuan lunged from his hiding place without thinking, his fingers closing on cold air and mist. He struck at a shoulder and met only a damp, fleeting resistance. Stop. He shouted, but the sound swallowed among the rails and the whistle. His grasp closed over nothing, and then the figure moved with the passing carriage and dissolved into the fog. In the place where the figure had stood, a glove lay on the edge of the step, wet and seamed with salt. Yuan bent and picked up the glove with 2 fingers. It was thin and worn. A faded ticket stub protruded from a pocket, the same ticket that had lain in the suitcase that morning. He felt a bitter, stunned anger when he realized the stub matched Marian's destination. He looked up at Hamish and Eliza. The lamp light painted their faces in hard lines. Eliza reached for the ticket with hands that trembled. Marian, she breathed. Her voice broke into a short cry. She clutched the glove as if it were proof, and not proof at once. Hamish saw softly, and then made a sound like a forced laugh. It left something tangible. That is something. At least. He set the lantern down and pressed his palm to his forehead. Yuan inspected the glove for traces. He lifted the faded ticket and smoothed the torn edge. He peered at the thread and then at the gloves inside. Damp footprints led away from the spot, and then they faded into the wooden boards, exactly as the earlier prints had. The ordinary markers of movement failed to continue. The climax left them raw. They sifted the glove into paper and brought it inside. At the platform office at dawn, they spread the objects on the desk, the glove, the faded ticket, the torn ledger. Each item shifted the balance of suspicion. Eliza made a decision that surprised them both. He will go to the town beyond the viaduct. She said Marian came from there once with a man who wrote to her in a heavy hand. I will ask at the inn. I will show them the locket if I must. Her voice had a steady edge. She had moved from fear into action. Hamish rubbed his hands together and said, I will keep the station clear. I will watch for stray travellers and keep the children away. He set his jaw and tightened the strap of his cap. He had moved from worry into protective duty. Yuan closed his notebook with a firm motion. Will take this ledger copy and the glove to the magistrate in the morning. I will ask about Mr. Ralston's movements. If someone in the town crossed that name to hide him, we will know why. He folded the ticket into a slip and tucked it into his pocket. The suspicion that had started the day had shifted into determined investigation. They did not pretend to have solved Marian's disappearance, but they had changed the problem from rumor into a case with items, names, and people to question. Evidence sat in the office like a small, stubborn claim on action. Before Eliza left, she pressed the locket into Hamish's palm and said, If you find anything else, if someone else disappears, tell me at once. I will not linger this time. She spoke with short cadence, then added, Hamish, keep the ledger safe. Her tone brooked no argument. Hamish nodded. Miss Fairbairn. We'll watch the timetables and mark every name. No more crossings without record. He looked at Yuan. Inspector Hart, will you be back? Yuan met his gaze. He will be back by midday. If not, I will send word. Do not let anyone else handle the ledger. If someone returns and says Marian left as planned, I want the record to match what we find. He buttoned his coat and set the magnifying lens on the desk as if to leave a visible charge. Eliza stepped into the doorway with the satchel over her shoulder. She turned once and said, Pray be careful. The words were plain and immediate. Then she left, her boots making measured sounds on the platform planks. Yuan sat alone for a long minute and ran his hand along the edge of the glove's seam. The emotion that had opened the chapter, suspicion, moved through him into a sharpened sequence, suspicion into frustration, frustration into concentrated curiosity, curiosity into resolve. Those shifts had driven his choices and the group's actions all day. Outside, a train whistle called distant and low. Inside the office, the ledger lay open and the crossed names stared up like an accusation. Dawnlight caught the ticket in Yuan's palm. He folded it carefully into his notebook and closed the cover. He rose, locked the office drawer around the ledger, and took up the magnifying lens. With a final, clear motion, he put the lens into his satchel and walked down the platform to meet whatever questioning and travel lay ahead. The station door clicked behind him, and the morning swallowed the sound. At that moment, the problem had been changed. It now required a journey, interviews, and witnesses beyond Windermere. The glove and ticket provided a map. The crossed ledger name suggested someone had tried to remove a record. They had a plan: Eliza to the inn, Hamish to protect the station, Yuan to press the magistrate and follow Ralston's trail. Eliza cried out as a pale silhouette vaulted between two passing carriages beneath the footbridge. Her satchel slipped from her shoulder and thumped onto the wooden planks. Fear tightened her hands. She did not wait to think, Hamish! Inspector! She shouted, and the name cut clean through the night. She ran down the metal steps, breath rasping, boots clanking. The boards shivered under her weight. In the gap between two carriages, a figure blurred and disappeared into the fog on the embankment. Eliza's fear pushed her forward. She ran without measuring risk. Within the first minutes, Eliza's mind placed the danger plainly. Someone was moving between moving trains at midnight and then stepping off at Windermere. That pattern matched the ticket found earlier and the damp suitcase that Inspector Yuan Hart had slammed on Hamish's desk in daylight. The problem, now immediate and physical, forced choices rather than questions. Hamish was already on the platform when she came up, lantern held low so its ring of light cut at the fog. He had the cap pulled down, watch in his hand. Eliza. Hamish, his voice steady though his fingers flexed on the ring of keysware. Did you see them? Below the bridge between the carriages, Eliza answered. She kept her voice, sure they went toward the south embankment. She found that speaking the facts eased her hands. Inspector Uwan Hart arrived 2 steps behind, coat collar up, satchel banging at his side. He crouched once to inspect the dropped satchel, and then looked up at Eliza. Did you touch anything, Eliza? Uwan, palms open and factual. No, she said. Her fingers brushed the strap. Grit stuck to her knucklersy, only called out. Uwan tapped his fingertips together and then moved toward the foot of the bridge. He measured the distance with his eyes like a man setting out a puzzle. Hamish, I want the signal box on low tonight. No trains to stop without the whistle. If the figure comes back, they'll pass slow. Keep the lamp low and listen for the carriage. Slow down. Uwan's voice held calm. The instruction kept the panic from spreading. They reached the embankment and found immediate traces, a scroll of wet footprints in the gravel, a damp handkerchief bunched against a clump of grass, and the edge of a ticket half buried where a rail bed dipped. Eliza bent to pick the ticket up with gloved fingers. The paper was water-darkened at the edge, but the name on it showed in ink neat enough to read. She felt a shift, suspicion narrowed into a precise H. When Eliza saw the name printed on the ticket, Maggie Rowan, her breath stopped. Maggie had been gone for weeks. Eliza had carried hope in practical ways, sending messages to neighbors, watching return trains. The name tied this night's danger directly to the friend she had been searching for. Maggie, Eliza aloud, and the single word turned the fear into purpose. She pressed the ticket between her fingers so hard the damp paper creased. Uwan crouched beside her and examined the ticket. Maggie Rowan. He asked Eliza, is that someone you know? Yes, she answered. Her voice steadied into determination. Maggie taught the younger girls at school before she left last month. She promised to write, and then no letters came. Hamish picked up the damp handkerchief and held it to the lamplight. This won't lie. Smells of coal and salt. Trains see. The footprints head toward the siding. He traced a path with his lantern. They followed the traces down the maintenance path. The fog clung low, but their lantern and oil lamp kept a corridor of visibility. The scent of iron and wet leather grew stronger. At the siding, an open carriage door yawed under the yellow oil light. A wet scarf lay across the step like someone had abandoned it in a hurry. Inside the carriage they found the child's drawing, a crude house with a crooked chimney, and a name scribbled in a child's hand, Maggie. A small, folded note tucked under the drawing contained a single sentence in a shaky adult hand. Bring her home. The paper betrayed water rings and a salt smear. The discovery threw the trio into a new configuration of motives. Eliza's initial fear sharpened into resolve, then into a different pressure: protect Maggie and understand who had left the note. Uwan's curiosity moved into a harder, investigative focus. Hamish's steadiness changed into protective worry for the station and the woman who had been his neighbor for years. Uwan lifted the drawing with gloved fingers. This is not an accidental item, he said. Someone wanted it noticed. Eliza, this links your friend to the carriage. Then we stop being gentle. Hamish, we do what we must. They spread a quick plan on the embankment. The ticket showed a pattern, the phantom boarded trains that did not stop. The passenger always disembarked at Winmer, leaving traces. Tonight they would force a slow stop and wait on the platform. Eliza volunteered to remain visible as bait. She could not explain the decision beyond a fact. Maggie's name inside the carriage turned the danger into a personal demand. Uwan hesitated and then met her eyes. It is risky. Eliza, he the words without a theatrical tone. The plainness made the danger tangible. I know, she said, but I will not stand aside. Maggie was my friend. I taught her. If there is someone trying to bring her back or someone asking to be heard, I must be here. Hamish's hand brushed hers. The motion was brief yet steadying. Then we set the signal low. He said, make the slow stop where I can see both ends of the platform. They moved into position as dawn narrowed to a pale gray. Hamish took the signal lever and crouched in the box. Uwan watched the tracks from the platform edge. Eliza stood where the lamp hallowed her, satchel at her feet, and the damp ticket folded in her palm like a talisman. The build toward the trap produced small shifts in emotion. Eliza's resolve edged into anxious waiting. She tightened and relaxed her fingers, counting lamplight rings. Suspicion circulated between Hamish and Yuan, then softened into a plan where each relied on the other. The fear that had driven them into action reappeared as careful vigilance. They heard the first distant whistle, and the carriage approached on an even, slow note, long and measured. Its wheels hummed, a different timbre from the faster expresses. The carriage slowed. A gust pushed fog across the platform, and the carriage's outline resolved into a dark rectangle with a single open step as it inhaled into Windermere. In the carriage doorway a figure rose. The phantom stepped forward with the same thin gait the station had learned to recognize, shoulders forward, coat hanging wet at the hems, a faded ticket tucked into a scuffed leather tag. Eliza moved toward the figure before she fully knew her own motion. Maggie. Eliza, and the name was an offering and a test. The phantom's head turned slowly. The face that answered was older, lines cut into the cheeks, pale gray eyes like weathered pewter. The voice that came was thin, and layered with the echo of Traveleza, it said, and the word loosened as if pulled from a long pocket of restraint. A sudden twist tightened the room. The phantom did not deny the name. Instead, the figure produced a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth and handed it toward Eliza. Inside was a child's schoolbook and a scrap of handwriting, Maggie's name written in an adult hand with a date 2 weeks past. Yuan stepped forward and commanded, "Show your hands." "Who are you?" His tone held authority like a tool. The phantom's hands were slim and gloved. The gloves came off by a slow, deliberate motion. A faded locket lay on a thin chain at the throat. Eliza recognized the locket's shape from a thin photograph she had once kept of the town's school. "GroupMe name is not for your ledger." The phantom, "But I have been trying to carry one thing where it would be seen." Hamish interrupted with a quick, sharp, practical question. "Why the trains? Why not write? Why leave a ticket?" The phantom met Hamish's eyes, and for the first time, the voice broke slightly, because the tracks remember where people move. The trains carry what people will not say aloud. I thought if I left a trail, someone who looked for what I left might come to understand. Eliza went closer and saw something in the phantom's fingers. A child's drawing almost identical to the one in the carriage. The paper had been folded and unfolded many times. Salt had bled the ink. "Who gave you Maggie's drawing?" "Eliza." The phantom's pale grey eyes looked past Eliza toward the tracks, where the carriage had paused. "She left it once and asked me to keep it safe. I kept it and could not get her to stay. I tried to call, and then the letters stopped arriving. I thought if I could put the picture onto a train and let someone find it." The voice faltered and then steadied into a thin line. "I thought I could bring her back." That line altered understanding. The twist: the phantom had been a guardian or companion to Maggie, not the abductor or a malevolent spectre. The object in hand, the child's drawing, transformed motive from malice into sorrowful fixity. The revelation forced an emotion shift across the trio. Suspicion became pity, then into a conflicted anger. Yuan's face hardened. "You used the trains to move people's attention. You risked lives. Why not seek help from a station or the sheriff?" He demanded. He did seek help. The phantom knocked on the town's doors. The replies were shut, or the answers were the wrong kind of help. My voice was small. "So I put the things where others might find them." The phantom's hand trembled, and then tightened. He thought the trains would carry what the town refused to carry. Hamish ground his teeth, and when the figure stepped between moving carriages and the satchel fell, "You made a station keep watch. You frightened us all." "I did not want to frighten you." The phantom only wanted someone to see the ticket and ask the name aloud. "I wanted Maggie named again." The phantom's mouth pressed into a line. Eliza stepped between them. "Hamish, Yuan, listen." The note said, "Bring her home." The drawing and the locket repeat that request. If someone in Windermere closed their doors when they could have helped, Then someone else used the tracks as a message. We have to know what happened to Maggie, not only punish the one who waited on the rails. Iwan met her gaze. The inspector's eyes were precise. You will do two things tonight. He said we will protect the platform, and we will seek the facts. If there is a harm to Maggie, we will find it. If there is wrongdoing in the method, we will record it. Eliza, were you willing to be seen? Yes, she answered, because names matter. They led the Phantom into the station office. Hamish closed the door and placed a cloak over a spare chair. The station office smelled of oil and paper and the residue of coal. Iwan opened his notebook and began to ask the measured questions that would turn confusion into a ledger. Start from the moment you last saw Maggie, he said. His questions were short, precise. The exchange that followed delivered concrete facts instead of speculation. The Phantom gave a sequence. Maggie had left Windermere for a coastal town to find work. She hid the drawing in a satchel for safety. She wrote once from a seaside lodging and then stopped. The Phantom had gone looking, waited in rooms at seaports, and once had a letter returned by a clerk who would not provide a forwarding address. At that point the Phantom turned to the train. She boarded several carriages and left the drawing where a passenger might find it and take it to another town. The Phantom. Iwan's pen moved. Did you ever see Maggie after that letter? No. The Phantom's fingers tightened on the edge of the chair, but I believe she came through a station once and did not stay. I thought the trains would carry her back. If someone asked the name aloud, a quick argument broke out. Hamish demanded that the Phantom explain why the figure had leapt between moving carriages. Iwan argued that a plan must account for public safety. Eliza argued that their focus had to include Maggie, and that names and tokens implied a different kind of culpability. The rapid exchange produced 3 shifts in tone: accusation, defense, and then a refusal to let the conversation dissolve into recrimination. Each line pushed the story forward. Each character's choices altered the resolution. In the midst of that argument, a new discovery arrived. A faint scrawl on the inside of the lockets cover a boarding house name and a number. Iwan's eyes fixed on the words. This is a lead. He said, can go now, or we can wait for daylight. And the sheriff. Hamish looked at Eliza. Go now. He said, if she is near the shore, the tide moves. We cannot wait until the clerk wakes. Eliza felt her fear thin into a different shape. Urgency to act for Maggie. She folded the damp ticket into her pocket and then straightened. Then we go, she said. They moved as a small team through the fog toward the path that led from the station to the coastal lodgings. The tracks hummed on their right. At intervals a slow train moaned past, a sound that made their footsteps precise. They arrived at a low row of lodging houses where lamps burned low. The boarding house door bore the name Iwan had read from the locket. They knocked. A stout woman answered, her face washed by lamplight. She asked, voice sleepy but careful. Iwan showed the locket and the ticket. Ms. Brody, we are looking for Maggie Rowan. Do you remember her? He asked. The woman blinked and then nodded slowly. Maggie came here. She didn't stay long. She left 3 weeks ago, pack and all. She paid her bill and said she'd be back for winter hire. Didn't come, mind. Eliza pressed the woman's hands. Did anyone leave with her? Did she speak of a companion? Mrs. Brody's brows knit. She mentioned a thin man who visited the lodging twice. He cried at the door like a child. He left a paper with instructions. He had ride trains until someone read the name. The town was quiet for some things. The woman paused and then added, I gave him hot broth. I did. The fact sharpened into something else. Windermere had not been the only place to fail to outwardly help. A small knot of negligence or fear threaded through towns. The Phantom's actions now appeared as a reaction to closed doors. They left the boarding house with a new narrow purpose: trace the thin man who had visited Maggie, and then find Maggie herself. The boarding house clerk had given them a direction toward a wharf where a man matching the Phantom's description had been seen buying passage with no intention of leaving footprints in the town records. At the wharf the tide lay low and the air smelled strongly of salt and oil and rope. A longshoreman pointed toward the breakwater. A man came here asking for shorelines at odd hours. He took a ticket to nowhere, or to everywhere. If you ask me, he wanted to vanish into the steam. Iwan took notes. The practical questions produced a small map of arrival and departure. Hamish listened for the sounds of trains in the distance and timed whistles against starboard lights. Eliza gripped the damp ticket in her pocket until the paper softened. They returned to Windermere as the sky lightened to a thin pale. Hamish locked the station office door after they filed the basic facts. Iwan sat to write the initial report while Eliza unfolded the child's drawing again to look at the handwriting close. The name printed there was Maggie's, with a date matching the locket's inscription. Maggie, they concluded, had not been taken by violence on the tracks. The evidence suggested she had moved between towns seeking work, and that someone, this phantom, had tried to attract attention and guilt people into remembering her name. The twist changed the moral weight of the night. The phantom's method endangered people, but behind it lay a human failure by the network of towns. Iwan's report began with precise sentences. He recorded the ticket, the damp suitcase from earlier days, the drawing, the boarding house note, and the locket's inscription. Hamish added a short statement about the station's lights and the slow stop. Eliza wrote nothing in the report. Instead, she folded the faded ticket into the locket and slipped it beneath her blouse near her heart. The final movement of the night required a decision. The phantom wanted to remain and continue to ride trains, leaving tokens. The inspector wanted to register the actions and press for legal restrictions. Hamish wanted to close the station's records and keep the peace of their platform. Eliza wanted Maggie found and for the phantom to have a place to tell the full story. They reached an agreement by small motions rather than rhetoric. Iwan would take custody of the locket and the drawing as evidence and also file a request to check coastal lodgings and boarding house registries. Hamish would keep watch and open the station ledger to any traveller who asked for Maggie by name. Eliza would carry the ticket and the knowledge forward and continue to ask neighbours for any sign. The phantom watched them decide. The thin face changed subtly from a tension of hope to a release so slight it might have been imagined if you search the lodgings the way you have begun. You will find where she stayed last, the phantom. She did not want trouble. She wanted only to be remembered. Iwan looked at the phantom, and then at Eliza. Will look, and we will take the matter up with the magistrate if needed. He said, and you will not step onto the tracks again in the dark. If you need help, you will tell Hamish or me. The phantom nodded once. The acknowledgement had the weight of a man surrendering an errand to other people's hands. Will stay out of the moving trains. The phantom, but let me ride in daylight to make people notice without risking them. Hamish closed the ledger and slid the brass key into his pocket. Do that then. Ride when there's light. Ask for a bed at the inn. Tell them Maggie's name. If they will not help, bring them to me. Well, find a way. Eliza folded the child's drawing and placed it inside the locket beside the ticket. She felt a small steadiness settling into her chest. The night's urgent fear had changed form twice, from fear into resolve, and then into a careful, watchful compassion. They left the station together as the morning widened and the first regular passenger trains resumed their schedules. The fog thinned to a damp gauze. A woman in a carriage looked out and saw the stationman and the small group on the platform. She waved. Hamish tipped his cap. Later, as Iwan filed his initial notes with the magistrate, Hamish swept the platform and checked the lantern oil. Eliza sat on the low bench and pressed the ticket into her palm, feeling the indentation of the inked name. They had resolved the immediate danger. The platform did not have to be a place where people risked life to make a demand. They had opened the trail that might find Maggie. The phantom would not ride at night again and would seek daytime passage to leave tokens in safer, visible places. The station's routine resumed its slow rhythms. Hamish locked the office and set the brass watch against his chest. Iwan left with a promise to follow the lodging's records. Eliza stood, folded the locket into her palm, and then slipped the faded ticket inside it as a quiet, private promise. She walked away from the lamp and toward the slow rise of the town, hearing the carriage wheels and the distant harbour horns. The final scene of the night was a concrete movement. Eliza turned the brass key in the station door, set the latch, and walked up the lane with the ticket folded against her heart. It was an ending made of actions, a promise kept, a record filed, a name carried forward. The station closed its door for now, but the work of finding Maggie and making the towns respond had begun in plain, recorded steps. Outside, the Phantom watched the platform from the shadow of the breakwater, hands empty and steady, then walked toward the wharf to seek daylight passage and the attention that had been refused at night. The ticket in Eliza's locket rustled once as she felt the weight, and kept walking toward people who would next speak Maggie's name aloud.